One thing that everybody in economic circles keeps an eye on is the prime rate.
Mm-hmm.
And the economists we spoke to last year for our economic outlook section projected a 4.0% prime rate to finish the year. We're currently at 3.5.
Right.
That might change actually in a couple days here,
Right.
depending on the vote and the decision Wednesday. What's your outlook? What do you expect to see in 2017 where that prime rate might end up?
Well, it's been an unprecedented low interest rate environment, and that's got everybody mystified. So even in 2012, there were a lot of talk about inflation coming back in, and so again, everybody missed I think or most everybody missed how low rates were going to stay for how long.
Mm-hmm.
And again, part of that reflects the global environment when you had Europe slipping back into a mini recession and their European banks were lowering the rate. You had negative interest rates in some of the European countries. But I think in our country you'll see a bump in rates, from in December from the Fed, and I would anticipate another couple of bumps next week or next year. So the end of 2017, I think would be at 4.25.
Yeah.
Would be and maybe 4.5. So there's always a reversion to the mean, and we've been below it too long for rates not to go up.
Mm-hmm. Another key economic indicator, GDP, it grew by 3.2% in the third quarter, which is its best rate in 2 years. However, expected to finish the year at 1.5%. That's not much to write home about there. Projections for 2017 is 2%, 2.1. You agree with that projection?
I do. We think of traditional good economy, healthy economy at 3% GDP growth, and that usually was a healthy growth, but a sustainable growth over time. But we've got some, I think, trends globally that affect that now that I'm not sure we're going to get there for the next 5-10 years. So I think low 2% will be. I think we'll do better than we did this year and the past year. Again, there's some good signs out there in home sales. Home prices are actually better now than pre-recession. We finally climbed back out of that long hole. Household net worth last month set a whole new record. We were over 80 trillion in household net worth, well over 80. So again, there are some good signs in our economy, but I don't think we're going to get to 3%. So I'd say in the low 2s would be my prediction as well.
Talk more about those trends. What are some of the other outside factors that will influence the economic growth, and maybe starting with the biggest issue close to home here in the presidency and the change in the White House. How do you see that affecting it?
Well, it's been positive so far. If you look at the reflection of the markets, and we're setting record after record with the Dow the last since the election. A couple of mega trends I think they're going to be affecting us. Number one, you've got baby boomers, this huge mass of humanity working through the workforce that are already started hitting retirement age several years ago, and you don't have the replacement workers coming up. So that's going to be they're going to be demanders of health care, a whole bunch of things, but not productive. So I think that's going to have a potential drag on the economy. And then uncertainty, just knowing what federal policy is going to be, what state policy is going to be, that the markets don't like uncertainty, and that sure could impact us. But what we're anticipating right now is less regulation, which in the short term at least certainly can make the economy more effective and more efficient. So we'll see where that goes. But it's an interesting time, certainly, with this uncertainty both on a state and a federal level. And so far, markets typically don't like uncertainty, but they have loved this so far. Yeah.
One of the things Donald Trump has talked about, aggressive tax cuts that he's proposing. Should those go through, what do you see that doing to the economy? Might it be negligible like we saw in the Bush era tax cuts, 2001, 2003, or is this something that could turn the tide to that 3% or higher GDP growth?
Well, we have a neighbor to the west that has been a great laboratory for us to look, and that's the state of Kansas, where they went in and cut taxes dramatically, hoping that growth would more than make up for that. That has not been the case. That has not been their experience, and so revenue growth has not been as good as ours, actually, in Missouri. So, and we saw it under the Bush administration that tax cuts did not stimulate the economy enough to overcome the lower federal revenues and replace those. So I think in the short term, tax cuts usually stimulate, but in the long run, you have to reinvest in infrastructure, you have to reinvest in people, and that comes from public dollars most, and over time, it's hard to sustain tax cuts and do those. The longest peacetime recovery we've ever had in our country was the 90s. And we had some tax reform that helped, but it was not near the drastic cuts that we saw, for instance, under the Bush administration. So I think there's a happy medium in there somewhere.
When will we see the next recession? What's your crystal ball showing in terms of when that'll come around?
Well, if you look at a historical sense, we're due for one, but I think the slower recovery has allowed this to sustain a little bit longer than if we would have had a really big rebound and recovery. Typically, recoveries reflect how severe the downturn was, and we had the worst recession since the Great Depression, which would have you would have anticipated a great recovery and the GDP climbing more quickly. That hadn't happened, so I think that's helped us to prolong a recovery. Now with what's going on in the economy, I don't see 17 being a recession. But I mean, what we know about the recession is our economy will always be cyclical. I remember in the late 90s, we started talking about maybe getting to monetary policy was so good that we were getting to where we wouldn't have a recession again, that we would have what we call a flat landing. I don't know if you remember those. A lot of economists were saying we're going to have a flat landing and then we're going to take off again. And then, a year later, we were in a recession again. So we'll always have recessions. We'll have one, whether it's 18, 19, I don't know. But you just know it'll come again. It always does.
18 at the earliest then.
18 at the earliest, yeah.